So my name's Caitlin Annis. I am only really introducing the session today. I'm going to be handing over to my colleagues Simon Martin and Helen Couchman, who are going to talk us through some of the issues around managing employee mental health in the workplace. Before we start talking about the detail of the session, I just wanted to remind everybody about our next HR Club, which takes place on the 9th of September, and which is going to be focusing on developing a people strategy. So hopefully you can join us for that one as well. So we wanted to focus on employee mental health because it's high up on the agenda for many organisations across lots of sectors at the moment, particularly as we come out of, we hope, the pandemic and out of lockdown for some, and think about new ways of working over the forthcoming weeks and months. Everyone across the UK has had really different experiences of the pandemic, and it has brought some individual challenges associated with how we manage our work and our personal lives, together with some physical and mental health implications. And that has induced some worry and anxiety about what the future world of work might look like and how we balance that with our personal lives. So that in part has led to an increased focus on how we manage employee mental health within the workplace and how we support our people going forwards. We're fortunate to have a really large group of people attending the session today, which can probably be seen as a reflection of the issues that are rising within the workplace, but also of how this has become a more important issue on people's agendas. So this is the agenda for the session today. So Simon and Helen will be addressing some of these mental health issues, their causes and effects, but we'll also look at some really proactive measures around things that you can do in your workplace to try to manage the mental health of your employees as effectively and positively as possible. The presentation is going to include a few poll questions and a case study. What we would like you to do is feel free to ask questions throughout the session using the chat box at the bottom of your screen. I will be keeping an eye on that, and I will either interrupt the speakers at an appropriate point to put the questions to them, or we've got a slot at the end where we're going to be looking at questions then. So feel free to ask anything as we go through the session. We will also be sharing the slides after the session, so you'll have a copy of those as well. I think that's everything from me. I hope you enjoy the session and find it useful. I'm now going to pass over to Simon.
So, work can have a positive impact on health and well-being. Healthy, well-motivated employees can have a positive impact on colleagues and the business generally. Work can also have a negative impact on health and well-being, including stress-related illnesses. The pandemic has created new ways of working that has exacerbated these mental health issues, and employers need to consider how they should be managed. So managing employee mental health is quite rightly at the forefront of a lot of employers' minds going forward, and everyone needs to think about the impact of mental health issues on the future success of the organisations. Employers also have legal obligations and must ensure good practice and have robust procedures to managing absences. So can we now move on to the first poll, please, Harriet? So if you just want to just see, the question is, what percentage of employees feel uncomfortable to speak to their employer about their mental health? Right, so the survey, which was done in 2020, said the answer was 49%. So just under half of employees felt uncomfortable speaking to their employer about the mental health. So the next poll is, what percentage, so next slide please, so what percentage of employees give an alternative reason for their absence when they're off work due to stress? Okay, well this poll, which was from 2019, the survey by a PhD person at Cardiff University, so it was 95%. But it's clear that we need to tackle the stigma of stress and mental health in the workplace to aid transparency and to understand the issues and the extent of the problem within our businesses more clearly. If our employees are not being honest with us, then we need to understand why and find solutions to support them and reassure them that we'll manage them effectively, and it's to their advantage to be honest and open. And Helen's, the part 2 of this webinar is really going to talk about the tactics and strategies that you should really be thinking about. So we've just had a look at some statistics. So can we move on to the next slide, please, Harriet? How big a problem is workplace stress? So 1 in 4 people in the UK will have a mental health problem at some point in their life, according to the Health and Safety Executive. And according to Mind, 1 in 6 workers is dealing with a mental health problem at the moment. And you can see the cost to employers. So what is workplace stress? Well, it's defined by the Health and Safety Executive as the adverse reaction people have to excessive pressures or other types of demand placed on them at work. So stress isn't an illness, it's a state. However, if stress becomes too excessive and prolonged, mental and physical illness may develop. So there's a difference between pressure and stress. So when a person has a volume of work they feel is manageable, they experience pressure. But when the volume is too much and they stop coping, then they become stressed. The pressure can be very positive and a motivating factor because it helps us to perform better, whereas stress can develop when an individual is unable to cope with the pressures and demands being placed on them. However, there are grave difficulties in objectively assessing what stress is, and more particularly, how it affects people. What to one person may be viewed as a thrilling adrenaline rush can cause another to experience stress levels that cause harm to health, whether physical or mental. So next slide, please, Harriet. So I've divided these stress into 2 categories. So the usual cause of stress. So if we were talking in 2019, pre-pandemic, we were talking about likely usual cause of stress, these are the sort of things we'd be talking about. So the demands of work, just the amount of work, the amount of control that an employee has over their work and how, whether they've got any say in what work they do and how they do it, the amount of support they get, relationships. So that's workplace relationships and external relationships. Their role. So some roles are inherently or tend to be inherently more stressful. And change is a massive cause of stress, and that can be change with promotion, but it can also be change as a result of, let's say, a demotion following a redundancy exercise, or if a couple of roles are combined following a redundancy exercise and you're taking on other work. So they're the usual cause of stress we'd be talking about. And then next slide, please, Harriet. So add to that mix, that none of those have gone away, add to that mix pandemic-related stress. So one of the big ones is burnout, and we'll have a look on the next slide at that. But other pandemic-related stress is working from home, juggling work from home, juggling work and family, including homeschooling. I had to help with homeschooling 6-year-old twins, and I still bear the scars of that. And I've also got the regular award of worst teacher ever, which I'm kind of proud of. Things like also worrying about the economy, there's very few areas of the economy that have been untouched by the pandemic. So worrying about the economy, worrying about your job, worrying about your own health and that of your family, worrying about your family's mental health, worrying about family members who've been isolating, worrying about family members losing their jobs. So there's an awful lot of factors there that will or can potentially add to stress. Burnout was a term previously used in a work context, but has followed us to working from home during the pandemic. So YouGov survey commissioned by Mental Health UK said 1 in 4 women in the UK felt unable to manage work stress and pressure. And the campaign group Compass has also published a report recently titled Burnout Britain, in which it makes a call for change in response to the news that mental distress among workers is now 49% higher than it was in 2019 across most sectors. So burnout includes mental and physical exhaustion. The World Health Organization has recognized it as a medical condition and described it as a medical phenomenon that results from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So you feel overwhelmed, drained, and unable to meet constant demands. It can be physically damaging, causing depressed mood, musculoskeletal pain, and can be used as a precursor to cardiovascular diseases. So without the physical distance of domestic and working lives, the challenge is our personal relationship operating alongside our professional ones. So people used to complain about their commute, but it was a time where it was a break from work. So it was a time to unwind in a way, and it marked a definite end between the end of the working day and home life. And so now, if the end of your working day is just marked by you closing your laptop at the kitchen table, that's not the same. So there's a risk that you'll carry on checking emails into the evening, uh, and you're not really ever switching off from work. Um, and it also, burnout's also to do with the way, with disconnection, you stop feeling like you're part of a team. You'll feel that like you're just working in a silo. So it's small things like missing that the sort of chat, how was your weekend, and general chat and communication. If you're just sort of get up, open a laptop and start working, you're missing that those workplace interaction. And the more disconnected you feel, the more burnout you feel. So what separated burnout from stress and exhaustion? Well, it's the emotional turmoil it causes. It tends to manifest into an inner agitation and frustration. It's vital to identify what you can and can't control, and then focus on the elements you can control to begin to tackle the burnout step by step. So, next slide, please, Harriet. So stress affects different people in different ways, and it can be difficult to predict, as I mentioned earlier, how people will balance the demands and pressures placed on them with their ability to cope. So stress can have lots of symptoms, just a few: insomnia, headaches, digestive problems, impaired concentration and fatigue. The stress can lead to a change in mood, for example, distrust, anxiety and fear, which can in turn damage relationships at work and home, and can lead to depression and anxiety disorders, and can even increase the risk of stroke, heart attack, diabetes and cancer. Long-term stress can lower immune systems and can lead to increased risk of viral infections. And research has shown that chronic stress in work can lead to something called metabolic syndrome, which is a combination of diabetes, high blood pressure and obesity. So next slide, please. So just in terms of an employer's obligations around stress, they really fall under these four headings. The first is health and safety. So although health and safety legislation originally focused on minimizing risks to physical safety, increasingly the focus is on employees' psychological health and welfare. And in fact, I mentioned earlier, the Health and Safety Executive now regards stress as the biggest health and safety risk. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, which is sort of ancient history in terms of employment legislation, provides the general duty to ensure the health and safety and welfare of employees. And the Health and Safety Executive expects employers to carry out risk assessments in relation to stress the same way it carries out risk assessments in relation to physical risks. So employers risk enforcement action, including improvement notices, prohibition notices if they fail to comply with their health and safety duties, and there's also a risk of prosecution in the criminal courts. So the next area is negligence and personal injury. So this really comes about where an employer is put on notice that an employee is suffering from stress. The classic case is an employee is signed off with stress. The employer said to their manager, "I'm not really coping very well," and really nothing is done. And so the employee comes back in, and with usually a reasonably short period, the employee is again signed off, and the employer, having been put on notice, being made aware that the employee was struggling. If the employer doesn't really do anything about it, and the employee their health is damaged, their mental health is damaged, or their physical health is damaged as a result of that, that's where the personal injury claims can come about. So the next area is disability discrimination. So disability discrimination says that it's a disability within the meaning of the Equality Act is a mental or physical impairment which is a long term, which means 12 months or more, adverse effect on your ability to carry out day-to-day activities. In my old job, my old life, I was an employment lawyer. And when I was a baby employment lawyer, the list of what could amount to a mental impairment was very limited. There was a sort of World Health Organization list, and it was really it was a sort of psychotic episode. But now the list has been loosened over the years, and now stress in itself can amount to a disability if it affects your ability to carry out day-to-day activities. And it can also exacerbate other conditions. So, for example, diabetes. And so stress contributing to something else can amount to a disability. And so the typical claims you tend to see are failure to make reasonable adjustments to assist the employee. So if the employee is flagging up, look, if I will work flexibly, that would really help me. If an employer fails to do that, and that would actually make the employment tribunal thinks that would have made a difference, that can amount to disability discrimination. And the other sort of classic disability discrimination claim is disability related discrimination. So typically, if an employee is suffering from stress, or the stress is adding to another condition, if that condition means they need to take time off, that is related to the disability. If the employer then dismisses the employee for their long-term absence, that can amount to disability discrimination. And the last sort of legal heading for this one is constructive dismissal. So this really applies to employees, in most cases employees who've got over 2 years service. The other three I've mentioned don't require any length of service, but constructive dismissal usually requires 2 years service. And this is a case where an employee can say, because of the way I've been treated, the employer has breached a fundamental term of my contract. And the fundamental term most employees rely on is this duty of trust and confidence, which is implied into all employment contracts. And so the employee said, you have failed to look after my mental health. I've raised concerns, you've done nothing about it, and now I'm effectively treating myself as if I've been dismissed. I'm resigning, I'm accepting the breach that you've done, and I'm resigning in response to the breach. So, so that's the other heading. So they're the sort of headings that an employee suffering from stress can rely on. They're the sort of legal framework in which this operates. So can we move on to the next slide, please, Harriet? So let's just look at a case study. So Caleb is a manager at Wasborough Limited. So due to a downturn in work, he was furloughed for several months during 2020. There was then a redundancy exercise in December 2020. He survived, but he found it incredibly stressful because a lot of his colleagues were going, and he was obviously worried about his own job. As a result of that, a number of colleagues have left, and that the remaining colleagues have had to pick up their workload. So his workload has increased significantly. He's guilty of sending the emails to colleagues between sort of 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Next slide, please, Harriet. And this is part 2 of the case study. And then a month ago, he sent an email to his manager to say he was struggling. He started to appear disheveled on Zoom calls and appeared to be slurring on a couple of calls. And there also have been some rumors that he may have been drinking at home during the day. And 2 clients have raised concerns about his demeanor on Zoom calls with them. And then today, he hasn't logged in for work and no one's heard from him. So, next slide. So, how would you approach this situation? What would you do if you were Caleb's manager? So if you can put your suggestions or ideas in the chat box, call to ask him if it's okay. Yes. Contact him. Consult with the manager. Yes, these are all good suggestions. Have a discussion with him. But does anyone think it'd be a good idea to start a disciplinary investigation into Caleb's drinking as a first step? Yeah, so a lot of the responses are sort of textbook stuff. So well done. So yeah, make contact him, make contact with him, get in touch, ask him, how he is, and discuss with him. I think, does anyone think it'd be a good idea just to do nothing and hope he resigns? Save on redundancy costs? No. That's no. Caroline said you've got a duty of care to all our employees. Yes. So yeah, could be constructive dismissal. I mean, lots of employers a few years ago, I think that was the sort of default is let's just hope they resign. But I think nowadays that's not particularly modern thinking. And also, do we think we could look at his workload, review his workload? Yeah, contact. Yeah, I mean, if he doesn't, yes, if he doesn't answer, then yes, I think you could consider potentially someone going round, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that. So the next slide is move on. Next slide, Harriet. So this is just really a reminder that the CALEB, if the employer fails to act in an appropriate way, he's potentially got the full list that he can go for. If his employer fails to act in a reasonable, caring way, then he's potentially got that full list of claims he could go for. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand on to Helen.
Thanks, Simon. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to now think about some proactive measures we can use, because I guess hearing all of that Simon's gone through, it can be a little overwhelming when you think about, how do we manage this? But good news is there's lots you can do. So, as Simon said, it's really important that to be able to manage well-being of your employees, you need to be able to recognise the signs of stress, them feeling overwhelmed and not coping. So Simon mentioned earlier, it's looking at those signs. So it's really important just to be mindful as you interact with your teams, as this will really help you to recognise an issue. But recognising the issue is particularly challenging if people are working from home or in certain environments such as schools where staff are restricted to bubbles. It doesn't offer much opportunity to sort of check in a kind of regularly and in an informal way. So this makes one-to-one meetings all the more vital to ensure you pick up any signs early and are offering the opportunity for your employees to be transparent and open about how they're managing their work and personal responsibilities. So this might be new to some managers, and so it's really important that, recognising that some line managers themselves might need training on recognising mental health issues. So this presentation will be shared with you all afterwards. So feel free to share our thoughts or ideas that we've mentioned here. Alternatively, there are sort of online courses available through local councils and other webinars and things that you can access as well that might be good for training line managers as well. So lots of businesses now have a specific focus on well-being and have introduced well-being policies, or they've sort of reviewed and amended their policies to sort of cover mental health more thoroughly. They may have even created specific well-being pages on their intranets, which I have experienced with one client, which has actually been really, really useful. So something like a well-being intranet page is an opportunity for you to provide everybody with resources and tools, and a lot of them free, that actually can help signpost people should they feel that they need a little bit of support. So you can guide them to podcasts, online mindfulness apps such as Headspace or Calm, You can have healthy living blogs, which talks about nutrition, and I think there's endless exercise classes for whatever anyone would like to do, which are all free and accessible. So if you could have a central place where you would be able to sort of signpost people, I think, you know, we found that actually really beneficial. So also try to ensure that you've up-to-date policies and procedures in place for sort of people and performance management, and guide your employees to, you know, the key here is really to manage their own well-being. If they feel supported and have tools available to them, it will be easier for you to manage any issues or concerns quite early on. And that will obviously avoid any longer term problems for you. Have a think about your benefit offering. So you might want to send out a specific communication to your teams that specifies the wellbeing benefits that you offer. Might be gym membership discounts, access to counselling, employee assistance programs. A lot of business have employee assistance programs at the moment, and they can offer those counselling opportunities, but also practical challenges that people might not have considered before, such as financial guidance, which obviously might be more relevant for employees, particularly sort of post-pandemic. So really sort of ensure that everyone is fully up to speed as to what is available to them. So coming on to sort of flexible working, the pandemic has been a fast track for many organisations to embrace flexible working. So we've been able to demonstrate that while it can sometimes obviously be a real challenge, as Simon mentioned, his teaching skills, but in the main, it's proven to be quite effective. So as you transition back to your new normal, you may well receive more requests for flexible working. It might be beneficial to review your flexible working policy and just be clear about how you would approach multiple flexible working requests, and you know what your parameters are as to what you may or may not be able to accommodate for your employees. So as we've discussed, active management through these robust measures will both reduce your absence levels and also create a culture that supports this sort of ongoing focus on well-being going forward. Next slide, please, Harriet. Thank you. So a few more sort of practical steps to think about increased well-being, and some of these are, you know, they can be considered for working from home and also in, you know, if people are in work or schools. Providing the opportunity for sort of regular exercise. Perhaps you could consider don't schedule meetings over lunchtime where possible, and just encourage employees to take a break away from their desks. You could think about focusing on, you know, your culture and what you want to achieve from supporting well-being. You know, the focus should really be on employees being effective, and you should not be promoting presenteeism at all, and that is both within the workplace but also online while working from home. It shouldn't be encouraged or expected, and I think you know, really communicating that to your teams that you know, we don't promote presenteeism is actually quite a strong message for people to really you know, appreciate businesses. You know, they don't want you sat there looking at your emails late at night, and just sort of a short comms about that might be helpful. If you get any performance issues, then you can manage them in line with your policies. So if they're in place, then you know you'll have the tools in place to be able to manage that. Another suggestion might be to sort of encourage regular breaks, and I know a lot of you might empathise with sort of back-to-back meetings, and so maybe consider, you know, you have a 30-minute or a 60-minute meeting, maybe you could schedule it to be 25 minutes or 55 minutes. So I mean, I would challenge anyone that sort of is in a 30-minute meeting that couldn't make it 25, and give the responsibility to the host of that meeting to say, you know, we're going to break slightly early, you know, just a couple of minutes early for, you know, people to just step away for a second before the next meeting. So little tools like that, you know, little changes like that are actually really effective for allowing people just that little bit of headspace and break in between meetings. So we've all of this sort of creates promoting the right culture. Obviously, we've talked about providing training for line managers in the previous slide. And when people feel overwhelmed, perhaps due to the excessive workload, perhaps some time management or prioritization training might help, or some training about building resilience. And again, this comes back to people being able to sort of manage their own well-being and mental health. So if you upskill your employees and provide some training, such as resilience training, they'll be able to identify their own triggers and to sort of promote their own self-management of their health. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a quick slide on stress risk assessments. So employees with 5 or more people have a legal duty to protect their employees from stress at work by doing risk assessments and acting on it. Now, if you have less than 5 people, you don't have to officially write it down. We would always recommend you do that. But you know, with 5 or more employees, you need something in place to identify any stresses that might be triggered in your organisation through those risk assessments. So any paperwork that you produced should really form maybe a plan, and which you can then communicate with your employees to be able to then think about ways you are managing those risks in your business. For most people, it doesn't need to be a big exercise, but just noting the main points and then thinking about how you might monitor those going forward. If anyone wants any templates with regards to stress risk assessment, then the Health and Safety Executive online does provide those templates. And it also actually has some quite good tips and tools to tackle work-related stress that are free to download if you would like. Next slide, please. So I know we've got a lot of attendees today within the education sector, so I thought it might be worth mentioning the huge emphasis within the school environment to tackle mental health and well-being for both pupils and teaching staff. We have worked with schools that have named well-being trustees, well-being committees, and named governors for pupil mental health and well-being. So if you don't already have something in place like this across any business, whatever your sector, you know, there's some great ideas there about being implemented about how you might wish to consider that for you. Some businesses have mental health first aiders that really champion well-being, and that is that really good first port of call and first contact in organisations for people to focus on or go to be able to sort of identify any issues that they've got. So we don't really have time in this session, so we could do a whole other session on managing absence. So we don't really have time to sort of discuss the procedure in detail, but we thought it might be important to just be mindful of the importance in managing absence due to mental health correctly. So there are serious implications for not managing absence, as I'm sure you know. Just a few figures here about managing absence, but where an absence lasts for 4 to 12 weeks, there's a 10 to 40% chance of the employee being off work for a year. So therefore, if you're proactive and do what you can to help the employee back to work early, then this will potentially help avoid the longer absence issue. And with longer absences, the risk of employees never returning to work are actually quite high, with 90% chance of someone not returning to work if they've been off for 6 to 12 months. So again, being proactive can help avoid the longer absences where possible, and therefore give a better chance of getting your staff back to work. Next slide, please. So with shorter term absences, we'll just quickly sort of go through a checklist of the process you should consider going through. So this is for people that have been off for less than 4 weeks or have multiple sort of day absences, and there's sort of some themes have been identified. So we suggest that you meet with your employee and discuss the situation and inform them that their levels have become problematic. Try to consider any underlying causes for the absences. Are there any adjustments, small adjustments that could maybe be discussed that might help? You might go on to identify the improvements that are needed. You'd need to sort of stress what you feel the issue is and how it's impacting both their role and the rest of the team, perhaps. and think about how, timetabling some objectives short term for them to work to. You'd then review this regularly and meet with the employee and sort of let them know if the improvements have been made. If not, that there may be formal action taken against the employee. So when the absence becomes longer term, you really need to, once again, meet with them, but you're likely to consider needing medical evidence. Now that would normally come through either getting GP notes, but a lot of businesses now, and we've seen a big increase in this with our clients, is the need to get occupational health assessments done, particularly actually through due to mental health reasons. Do sort of remember your duties under the AMRA. The employee will need to consent to that occupational health referral, and they do have the opportunity to be able to see the report before you do. So think about your referral letter and what you write in that letter. This is a great opportunity for you to have questions answered about understanding more about the illness or issue that employee faces, but also it's an opportunity for you to ask, what reasonable adjustments could be made, and therefore you will have a lot of information available to you afterwards to be able to effectively manage it, or it will support you with sort of evidence that may not be possible for you to do that for that individual. You might be referring for the reason that you're seeking advice on maybe a phased return to work, or they may be off on a long-term basis, and so you need to think about how you any adjustments you might be able to make to support that individual coming back. So remember also, I think I mentioned it, but remember the employee sees that letter as well. So they need to give consent, they can see the report, and they can see the referral letter. So just be mindful and open and honest about what the information is that you need from the report. And so once you've had that report back, then obviously they would, they could well have seen it before you, but you would meet with that employee to discuss the medical report and ask them for comments on it. You need to think about whether you can accommodate the adjustments that may have been suggested, or are there any alternative roles that can be discussed with the employee. If there does look like there's no option for a return, you need to, if you've got your processes in place and they're robust and thorough and everyone's clear on how to use those, you would need to just follow a fair procedure to be able to deal with it. You'd need to consult with your employee at all times throughout the process and allow them to be accompanied, and you'd offer them the right to appeal against the dismissal. Next slide, please. So hopefully you found that sort of session useful. Just by way of concluding before we open up to questions, we just wanted to sort of summarize that we would recommend that you, sort of following this session, identify your current risks in your organisation with regards to sort of managing your employee mental health. That will enable you really to sort of see the bigger picture and to be able to plan and implement tools to be able to tackle them appropriately. So if you have suitable resources, you may have them in place already through your benefits package, or you may think we've sort of shared some ideas there about sort of free signposting, things you can signpost to your employees that actually are really quick wins. Ensure you communicate that well and regularly, and you may wish to sort of think about mental health champions in your business if you don't have them already. If you can create an environment where that empowers employees to manage their own mental health, whilst knowing that they have the support of the organisation should they need it, you will create that sort of open and honest culture. And coming back to the polls at the beginning, hopefully that will reduce that 95% of people that aren't open and honest about being absent due to stress. Hopefully using these tips, the absence levels will be reduced, and you will be able to sort of have a much clearer picture of the well-being and mental health in your organisation. So thank you very much. we are going to open it now to questions. I think Caitlin is going to take over with that. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Helen. Right, we had a couple of questions that came in as Simon was finishing his session. So I think if we go back to one of those, so somebody has asked if we could just go back to the expand a little bit on the CALEB case study and talk about how disability discrimination may apply in that situation. So Simon, could I get you to just talk about that briefly?
Sure. So the way that disability discrimination is likely to apply in Caleb's case is assuming that he's deemed to be disabled. It's always worth remembering that that it's a tribunal decision. The doctors, EPs, occupational health specialists, they don't actually make the decision about whether someone's disabled or not. It's ultimately the employment judge who makes that decision. But assuming that Caleb is deemed to be disabled within the meaning of the Act, then the likely way that he could bring a disability discrimination claim would be for failure to make the reasonable adjustments. If he's flagging up saying, like, I'm struggling, I need some more help, I mean, possibly the case study, there might be more behind it, in that he might be saying, like, you know, I'm struggling. He might be suggesting the help he needs, and if the manager doesn't react in any way and doesn't do anything about it, then if Caleb's condition or his stress worsens because of the failure to make reasonable adjustments, then that is something that could amount to disability discrimination, and is also likely to be what will feed into potentially a constructive dismissal claim. So it's the failure to act that is likely to trigger both failure to make reasonable adjustments and a constructive dismissal claim.
Brilliant, thanks, Simon. So we've got something that's come in here saying, rather than absence, we have an employee who says they can't do some physical elements of their caretaking role, but there's no medical evidence, and they're currently refusing an occupational health referral to help us manage their role as they feel this would cause them stress. What do you suggest?
Well, that's that one is where an employee won't agree to be seen by occupational health. The message is, look, we want to help you, we want to we need to address this, but we want to address it based on the best information we can get, and we think that the occupational health people, they're the specialists in this, but if you won't consent, then that may not be in your best interest, because we're just going to have to make a decision based on what we've got at the moment. And it's to encourage them and to explain to them the purpose that you're asking for occupational health. It's not necessarily to sort of find a way to get rid of them. It's wanting to find a way to help them, but making it clear that you are going to have to make a decision. And so it's not allowing you to get decent evidence is not necessarily the best thing.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's about presenting it as a supportive process, isn't it? And hoping to get people on board with that, which I know sometimes can be quite difficult. We've got a couple of questions about how you might deal with some of these more proactive measures. So the first one is that if an SME doesn't have any wellbeing policies in place, nor mental health first aiders or EAP, would you recommend they start with introducing a template policy, for example, from Acas? Helen, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think Acas is a great resource, isn't it? And I think, you know, if you're sort of starting from scratch, really, I would absolutely create a basic sort of wellbeing policy. Have a think about maybe the employee wellbeing champions, having, you know, obviously someone would have their line manager available to them to contact, but sometimes as well having a sort of impartial third person in the business to be able to contact and speak to confidentially is really worthwhile. So think about those sort of quick wins, and as I sort of mentioned, with kind of things, actually sometimes just consolidating resources, you know, like the apps and the blogs and the, you know, links to websites and things like that, actually just sort of sending those out and consult, you know, having somewhere that people can actually go to and access them really easily is a really good place to start. But I would definitely sort of get a template off Acas and then just consider how it fits in with your culture and maybe some adjustments you might like to make to it that make it work for you.
Brilliant. The next question, sort of slightly along similar lines, is I suppose how to get everybody on board with this process. So any advice on how to encourage senior managers that this is something worth being involved in and being led from the top and not just an HR-led thing?
You know, that's sometimes a tricky one, isn't it? I appreciate that. I think this is something that isn't going to go away, and I think this is something that should not be ignored and can't be ignored. And I appreciate that some people take longer to sort of appreciate that and accept it. Those of you who have dealt with absences, long or short term, or have gone through occupational health referrals and managed sort of situations similar to this will understand the time it takes to do that. And so I think that, you know, there needs to be an understanding of the impact if it isn't done, which I appreciate is sort of a bit of a negative way to look at it. But at the same time, you know, think about the positives, think about creating a culture where in the long run, you're spending less management time on dealing with these issues because you're allowing people to manage their own health. You are providing them with those resources. You have access to them. It's more open and honest. Therefore, when you do have an absence issue, then the whole process is managed much more smoothly because, you know, everybody is being much more open and transparent about that.
Yeah, and there's also a broader sort of cultural point within organisations that some organisations tend to think sort of disciplinaries, grievances, dealing with sickness, absence, or anything like that is always HR's issue. But HR really should, I think, be there to assist managers to do that. And I think there's often a broader cultural point to get managers to realise that they are there to manage, and that includes dealing with these issues. HR, their role is to support that. So yes, there's often quite a big task there for employers to change the culture around that.
Absolutely. A couple of points. So somebody's asked if we have a free list, if we have a list of free tools and resources that we could share, and that's certainly something that we could try to put together and send out with the follow-up from this session. So yes, certainly we'll have a go at that. Just going back to, I think, Simon's point around reasonable adjustments. Somebody's asked, when does cost come into things if adjustments are not affordable?
Well, that goes as part of reasonableness, but in an employment tribunal, their view is the bigger the employer is, the more they're expected to do. So there's not sort of one fixed answer for what's reasonable. If you're a two-person organisation, then what's reasonable for you is going to be different than if you are a 2,000-person organisation. And the other thing to think about is, and the sort of question you're likely to be asked is, have you looked for external resources? There's often quite a bit of funding available from various outside organisations. So it's important you've been seen. What's going to be important is you've been seen to be proactive and looking into this. And so, yeah, it's not just your own funds, but have you looked into funding from other organisations?
But it's certainly not the case that an adjustment simply must be agreed with.
No. But it's about being seen to be looking into it. And if you're going to be saying no, you need to say these are the steps we've taken, and it's no because of X, Y, Z. But it's important you can show the steps you've taken. It's really good practice to take a note of all the steps you're doing as you're doing them. So you've got a record, and so you can say, look, the question came in, this is what we did, this is how we looked at it. We approached it with the approach of, can we assist? Is there anything we can do? And then you looked at it on that basis rather than just saying no. For the outset.
Absolutely, yeah. And somebody has just said very helpfully, reminded us of about the access to work link on gov.uk, which is really helpful. So that's definitely somewhere to start if you're facing this sort of decision. We've had another question in about mental health first aiders, asking if you have to pay an allowance to mental health first aiders as you would with other first aiders. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that.
To be honest.
We all paused there, didn't we? I don't know. We can look into it, can't we? I mean, I would suggest maybe a nominal kind of uplift would be would be a good idea, just to reflect the sort of additional responsibility. They'd also obviously need some training, which you would have to invest in, to make sure that they know how to sort of signpost issues or escalate them if required. We can look into that.
And so, as somebody said, that they do where they work, so obviously some people are doing that. Okay, we've got another question. How do you manage when COVID has increased stress amongst staff that we do not have the resources to manage effectively? We have systems in place, but COVID has stretched these and they are not as robust as they would be normally. Would tribunals take this into account? Yes,
I think tribunals would. I think they will get that we're all in very challenging times, and really I think they'll want to see that you're doing your best, really. But yes, they will get that there are finite resources and you're doing what you can.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious of time. We've got a couple more questions that have come in. Somebody's made a comment saying, in a similar vein, if you have mental health first aiders, you'll need to ensure there's refresher training in place, which is a good point. Right, we've got a question about travel, which is going to be an interesting one, isn't it, over the next few months with employees. So if an employee on furlough travelled to Pakistan in February and is now saying they cannot afford to return to the UK due to the cost of the ticket, with Pakistan being placed on the red list and the isolation costs, what are the options as we need them back in the business? We might need to give that one, but it's the sort of question that I think is going to come up alongside the sorts of questions you might have where perhaps, as we had last summer, staff travel to various holiday destinations. The rules then perhaps change when they're there, and suddenly they have to isolate when they get home, and perhaps you need them in the business. And what do you tell your staff about making plans for those holidays and how they would manage it? We're obviously slightly off topic here, but it's certainly something that people are going to need to think about.
I mean, I'm guessing there's no way that they could work remotely from Pakistan. I'm guessing that's the case.
And I guess you'd consider, did they get any consent or approval or anything like that, before they went? If the business consented to it, then I guess, it's sort of almost, maybe it's a conversation about negotiation. Can they come back and have a small amount, an amount out of their pay every month to pay it back if they can't afford to come back? But if they sort of went without informing the employer, then that is a more difficult situation, I think, that they would have.
Because
I guess financially you could support them by maybe paying for a ticket and then subsidise, taking it out the salary possibly for a period of time.
Because I did a couple of tribunals years ago where about employees going on holiday when they'd be told they couldn't. They applied for holiday, they were told no because they'd missed out, and then they went anyway, and that's a straightforward disciplinary issue because that's failure to comply with the reasonable instruction. Basically, they'd obviously booked holiday first, then got round to asking for permission, and told no, and that's So is there any conduct issues there? Were they disobeying something they've been told?
Was there any guidance, I suppose, at the time around travelling. It's obviously very complicated when the list of countries and which categories they fall into changes over time, and I can see that presents some particular complications. We have got one other question. It's on quite specific facts, and what I'm going to suggest is that perhaps when the session ends, we talk about that one then, if that's okay, because it is quite specific, that one.
Yeah.
I'm just checking whether there's any that I've missed. I think we've covered everything. Right, I think we are at 10 o'clock. So unless there are any final questions, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us. It's been a great session. Thank you, Helen and Simon. And hopefully join us in September for our session on developing a people strategy.